Sorry, but I can't think. Once you get out there, don't cut and drop. Because if a plant has a disease or insect eggs, you're just spreading your problems from last season to this season. Take a cart, take a trash can, take a bag, take anything, and get them out of there. Don't leave them out in your garden. Grasses are a different story because there's not that many diseases that can affect it, and it's going to affect the crown instead of the leaves. So this can stay for the birds to use for nesting materials. So that's good. So when you go out there, you're going to take a look at your plants, and you can see that they look pretty awful right now. A lot of brown, a lot of black, a lot of bare branches. So what do I prune? How do I prune it? Do I take shears to it? Do I whatever? Well, your first step is to take your clippers with you. When you go out there on let's say a plant that looks like this one. Looks pretty dead, right?
It's too early to do it yet, though, right?
I would wait, but you can take dead wood out. You can prune suckers off the bottom and different things like that. But I wouldn't do too much pruning. This one though isn't going to need that much pruning anyway. But if this was dead, you take it right down to the ground, hope it comes back with the roots. But when you have a bare tree like this or a shrub, you want to do the scratch test. So you go up to the bark and you take your finger and you scratch it. Green, alive. You scratch it and it's brown, dead. Because it was frozen at the bark. This tree goes dormant. Other trees that you scratch and they're brown, they die in the winter. So you don't really know unless you know your plants. This is a privet. So it's going to come back. This one's also a privet. And as you can see, this one's already started new growth. So plants are going to kind of have their own start. And you can see all the new growth coming on this one here. But this was a double stuck plant as far as there's two cuttings in here. So this side, scratching it, you won't scratch or it's brown. This side's dead. This side you scratch it and it's green. So not the whole bush is going to look the same. So you kind of have to go in and select. So your fingernails going to get a little sore after a while. So if you take a little pocket knife or some sort of little scraper, put it on a string, tie it off to your belt loop or you can even tie it onto your clippers. But I would use a tool because after a while, and plus if you've got moisture out there, your fingernail is going to give up. So, but the scratch test is a sure sign to find out if it's dead or not. And there might be individual branches like this one. It's got new growth, but the top is dead. So you're going to take it back to just above that new growth and cut it. You don't have to worry about an angle cut unless the stem is hollow. And we do have some native plants that are hollow. But you just select prune, go in. You can almost tell, and you can bend them. If they're pliable and they bend, it's alive. If they're pliable and break, they're not pliable and they break, then they're dead. So that whole part has to come out. So I'm just going to kind of shape this guy up because it's on my head. But it's a long branch. It didn't go with the rest of the tree, so that would have looked funny when the foliage came on. Another thing that you want to look for when you're looking at your plants out there, our native plants love to reseed. And there's some that if you have coreopsis, red sage, a lot of them will reseed. So you're going to have seedlings. Wherever a flower is high, it's going to put out seed. If the birds don't eat it, or when the birds are eating it, it scatters in the wind, you're going to have a lot of babies come up all around your yard. Just take your little trowel, dig it up, take it over to one of your garden beds, make a little hole, put it in there, water it for a week or two, it'll be fine. Not every day, just watch it. If it's wilting, water it. If it's not wilting, leave it go. But you can take all those babies and save them, and you don't have to pay $5 or $6 for a new one when you want to replace it. So, and if you don't want to keep them, you can always put it in a pot and bring it in for the raffle for somebody else to enjoy. So once you figure out what's alive and what's not, you might want to shape your tree. Since this one's a tree and this is a shrub, I'm going to go ahead and prune. And notice where my blade is, against the trunk. You do it this way you're gonna leave a nub because of the thickness of the non-cutting blade. So you want to put the cutting blade against your shrub, okay? And because this one was in a pot, I've got little babies of something coming up in there. So I'm gonna let them grow up until I can spot what they are, or recognize what they are. So that's a good way of doing those that look dead, but may or may not be scratched. This is goldenrod. Everybody knows goldenrod dies off, but it won't come back from this. This plant is gone. But see these three little guys here? Those are babies coming up from the root, but they're not a seedling. They're a root runner off of the mother plant. So certain plants put out root runners where others will reseed. So all you got to do with this one is just cut it off right at the ground. And you can do these now. I mean, there's no big deal about doing them because they're going to come up from the babies, the ground. Very, very easy to do your tall plants that bloom high because that whole stem generally is going to die back anyway. If it's not frozen, it's just what the plant does is it dies back, the stem. Your goldenrod
coming up from the roots there, are they going to be a little faster grown, stronger, and bigger?
They'll be bigger in the spring, but they won't be any stronger than the mother plant was. They're going to grow the same. They got the same characteristics of the mother plant.
They won't get bigger because they got the root system.
No, because they actually have a lesser of a root system. When you bought this plant, it had a root system inside this pot. These are on a little runner that's coming off the side of the mother plant. Eventually, when it grows and it's on its own roots, which it'll put out after it breaks surface, it will actually abort from the mother by stopping flow of everything to it, and that runner that it started from will break off or die off from the mother plant. Well, we got a lot of them that do that. I think Stokes aster does it. A lot of wildflowers do that, but you'll see babies coming up right alongside the mother, and the mother's totally gone. Okay, so just cut the mother off, everything's fine. This is one of the, I think this, you know what this one is, Athena? It's not cut leaf, is it?
It's kind of got that sunflower.
Yeah. I think it's cut leaf black-eyed Susan. That's another one where the mother plant's going to disappear, even if it doesn't freeze. It's at the end of its cycle, seed to seed. It came from a seed, it produces a seed, it's going to die back. It's not a perennial. Well, it's a sort of a perennial. They can live a couple years, but generally won't. The mother plant's going to go. So all you do is find the base of that, cut it off, and these are also root suckers. Okay, so those are another one that's going to come up. So you're going to get these coming up in the same general area that the mother plant was in. Red sage, coreopsis, some of those others, seedlings are going to go all over the place. So you're going to find them everywhere. But just take your trowel, put them in a pot, or put them in your garden somewhere. Take care of them for about 10 days, they're good to go. This one I was sort of upset about. I had two of them. This is one of the St. John worts. This is the ground cover St. John's. Totally died back. I thought they were gone, but the other one is gone. This one came back. So I do have some growth there. So what I'm going to do with this one is find out where that stem is first before you start cutting. So you want to make sure that you find where the new growth is coming from. And you do not want to cut that one off. You cut the rest of them off. Just above the ground. Nothing fancy about it. Don't worry about what kind of pruning cut you're doing on this because you're taking it off right at the ground. And hopefully that's going to come back a little bit better. This is a new plant for me, so I don't know too much about it. Grass is crazy. Even if you don't get a freeze, grasses will tend to put off brown bibs. The grass growth coming out called bibs. And the bibs will, as the plant ages and the clump gets way bigger and bigger. This is a Takahashi or gamma grass. All you have to do, a lot of times they just pull right out. A lot of people say, how do you cut back woolly grass? How do you cut back Takahashi? How do you cut back Elliot Lovegrass? Well, what I can't pull out, what I do, I don't go in, I don't have time to go in and get all those little brown leaves in the middle. So I do what's called a V cut. You cut out at an angle, take your clippers down, go right up against the mound. So you're gonna cut like this all the way around. Take all that brown off the bottom. I leave mine in the garden for the birds. You don't have to. If you have a yard that's part native and part other plants and you kind of keep it clean, I wouldn't leave them laying around, but I have tons of birds that make nests out there. And I actually grow the Takahachi so the quail and the dove have a place to hide because they're ground feeders. And they'll come up underneath the feeding area station, but they will not go up into the feeder. So I have grasses around my feeding station just for the doves and quails so they'll come up and feed. This is another Takahachi.
When you're cutting them from the sides,
Yeah.
then you leave a tuft in the middle?
Yeah, so
cut it off?
when you're done, your plant's gonna look like this, V shape.
Okay.
There's gonna be brown in there, and if you wanna take time to take it out, what I do is do that V cut. Sometime before the next winter, I go in and pull out the clumps where I made the cut, because you're still gonna have grass that you cut off the end, and it's gonna start dying back. And once it's there for 6 months to 7 months, it'll pull right out, just big old handfuls of it. If your plant, as these age, what'll happen, because when it puts out new bibs, it puts it out towards the outer side, you may get that center opened up. And there is some funguses that can get in there during a wet season. So if I see brown in the center and it's all brown, no green, because what happens is your green comes right up in the middle of the brown. So it's very, very hard to prune it unless you go each individual, you know, you got time for that, great. That's the best way to do it. But I don't have time for that. As you can see, I didn't even get time to put my plants in the ground. So I had them for the program. This is Elliot Lovegrass, the same thing. Most of it will pull out. See the grass coming back in the middle? So you got that grass, we have muley grass, and, oh, right in front of me. And this is blue-eyed grass, yes.
You cut the pumpkin grass and muley grass.
I cut them all the same. She asked if you cut all the grasses the same, the woolly grass, the same as we showed on the Takahachi. Yes. But with the woolly grass, you're gonna want to take those spent plumes out when they turn brown. Let them go brown because the bird's gonna feed from the seed and the seed is gonna spread and then you can get more plants. But they don't reproduce as quick and as happily as a Takahachi. You'll find many babies of the Takahachi, or when you put in 5, the next season you might have 7 or 8 or 10 or 12. They do show up, and because it's just one little sprig, you're not going to see it. And if you're not out in your garden all the time, that thing's going to be a good sized plant by the time you recognize it. I just leave them there. As long as the quail have their trail through there, I don't care.
Do you have to cut them out?
No,
Mine are still green.
you're lucky. I don't have much green in my yard. I was happy to see some plants coming back. So blue-eyed grass, I usually cut it in late fall once the blue-eyed grass goes down. I cut the clumps off because I won't have to deal with this because it's a very, very fine grass. And sometimes, this one's pretty rooted. Sometimes they're not so rooted and you pull the whole thing up. Then you're either gonna take time to plant it or toss it with the scraps. And I don't like to toss anything. So, cut it back after the plant starts to die back. It'll be brown. Just cut it back in late fall, let it go through the winter, and it'll come back in the spring from the roots.
But if you did not cut it back in the fall?
What's that?
So what do you do if you did not cut it back in the fall?
You have trouble like this. You got a lot of brown in there.
You got to hand pick it all out?
You can hand pick it, or not. You can, it's tall, the green grass, the green part is lower. So what you can do is sort of hold it up and cut off the very top and just let it fall where it falls. Let the birds take care of it. Or the deer will come and eat it.
Will my Takahachi grass put out pups or babies around it?
It's actually, yes, the Takahachi grass will put out pups. It doesn't put a grass clumps. So it's all part of the original clump. So the clump just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. You can go in and dig that thing up and separate it into 5 or 6 plants and replant them in different locations in your yard. Transplants very, very well. And I just take a shovel and cut it up to pieces. If it's in a pot and you have a grass and it's really, really thick in your pot,
I was in the ground.
I know, but I'm saying, if you have one in a pot that you get from a nursery and it's a little root bound, cut the bottom inch or so off the bottom, then separate it into 4 plants and plant that. You're gonna cut through a couple bibs, but it's worth it. Now, this plant looks pretty sad. What was this?
Sour orange. Sour orange.
Sour orange. Okay. This plant generally doesn't get this cold, but we've had one of those weird winters again. The stem is not damaged at all. These leaves were damaged, but they're going to fall off and you're going to get new growth. The least pruning you do on a citrus tree, the better. You never want to take the top out because you're going to get peppercorn shoots from the very top and nowhere else. So unless it's damaged on the tip, do not do that. Now, if you want, you can go in and take these off. They're not hard to get off, but remember, sour orange has thorns. They can hurt you, and I get cut up enough. So this is twin flower. Twin flower is really a ground cover, and you can see that it's coming back. Very, very simple, just to cut off these dead ones and let the baby go. Oops. Sorry, I was hiding. Okay, and let it go. This is one that puts out a lot of root runners. I don't think they seed. I think they just keep putting out from the original plant that you put in. Yes, ma'am.
I was waiting for the last cold snap, and my peaches and my mulberries already have blossoms and fruit on them. So what do I do?
There's not. She said if she has peaches and other flower and fruiting trees that have already put out their spring flowers, there's not much you can do. If we get a deep cold, you're going to lose your fruit.
Yeah.
So you just got to hope that we're done.
So don't bother pruning them this year?
What?
Don't bother pruning them at all this year?
You can, but if they got flowers on them, you don't want to.
Okay.
You should do most of your pruning on a fruit tree in the late fall, like September, to thin it out in the middle so you have air going through, so you have less diseases, less insects. And any giant whips, go ahead and reduce some of those whips so you'll get more growth tips, therefore more flowers.
Okay, because I got paperwork from IFAS and it said to do it in the spring before they start blooming and.
Well, everything was tricked this year because we got that very, very cold, and another back-to-back cold, and then we got a long spell of heat, and then another cold.
Exactly.
So a lot of stuff that put out new growth got hit. If it doesn't get another flush of new growth, then you're going to have problems with that.
No peaches again this year.
This one surprised me. I thought, being a cassia, they freeze down to the ground. This one happened to have a dog food bag blew up against it. Not on my list of how to do frost protection, but it protected it. What was exposed froze, but below that didn't freeze. So I already have new growth on my cassia, which generally are down to the ground and you get them back to the root. So I'm happy with that. So what I'm going to do is scrape. I'm still going to scrape. And if it's brown up here, I'm going to cut it off. You can see that one's brown. Okay. Brown. Okay. Now my other three are frozen to the ground. So I'm going to watch this guy and see if he does better by not getting frozen, or whether the others that are coming from the root are going to be stronger and more vigorous when they bring in their new growth. So we're going to see about her. I think this is the Bahama one. This is a thing of lead soil. Okay, this is a golden dewdrop. Is a native. Some people question it. In North Florida, it's considered a native. Here, it's considered non-native. But in my yard, anything's welcome. So Obviously, this is all brown. See the, well, actually, this has split bark. That's another thing that can happen with your cold, when you have cold weather. A lot of plants will freeze, and if it warms up too quick the next day, you will get split bark. It happens on quite a few plants. So if you get split bark, even if you get growth up here, cut it down to the ground or down to where it's new growth without split bark. Can I cut this? Oh. It's her plant. So there is a little growth, right? I don't know if y'all can see that. See that little tiny piece of green right there? That's the only new growth as of now. So we're going to cut it down.
What plant is that?
Golden dewdrop. Dendrorum, what is it called, Donna? Do you know the botanical name, Dendrorum?
That was like Dorado.
Dorado? Golden dewdrop. It gets pretty little clusters of purplish flowers, and there's cultivars. You got sapphire is a deeper purple. There is a white, and then the seed is a hanging cluster of golden berries. We'll make animals sick, we'll make people sick, but the birds love them. So if you have it low hanging, you have a dog, don't let him eat them. Won't make him sick, but he will vomit. He will get sick that way. So you don't want them to get sick. We have a few plants. The Kunti has toxicity into it. So we do have a few plants that can harm animals and kids. Okay, anyone know this plant?
That's a Deborah.
Tree.
Charlie Brown.
Tree.
It's a tree. It's a haw, H-A-W. Not sure which one. It could be possum. It could be summer haw. What's the other ones?
Parsley.
Yeah, parsley leaf haw.
I thought they were cold hardy.
It is. It's alive. You would do that scratch test, and every bit of this thing is green. So, only pruning I would suggest on a haw for 2 reasons. It has thorns. So you don't want to get in there and pull your arm out and have blood running all down your arm. But they don't really need, they're more of a very tight canopy tree. They do reseed. I have one on my property. Again, I don't know which one it is, but there was one 10 years ago. Now I think we have about 20 or 25. I don't do anything to them.
I'd come dig some up.
These are like big. I can't find them when they're babies.
How big does it get?
About 12 foot tall, 12 to 15 foot tall, with a real big spread that sort of weeps.
That's probably Michaud's haw.
Hmm?
I think that's Michaud's haw.
Yeah. So, and they do have fruit that is edible. If you can beat the raccoons, the birds, the squirrels, and everything else out there that does it. So I actually found this one during when we had the native plant program over there, the annual that everybody comes to. What is it, the annual? Is that what it's called? And I found this one. And I found an Leaf Viburnum, which is 2 plants that are hard to find in even our native nurseries. They just don't grow them for some reason. And they're both doing fine. So, do we have any questions on pruning?
Did you say you would not prune this?
No. Only thing that I would prune is if 2 branches come across each other like this and they're going to rub, I will take one of them off or somehow get that open there so they're not going to, because blowing will rub and cause a wound, and then you have a chance of setting in with disease. So this is one of those ones that you just let it go. Now, there might be some dead tips because plants do that. It's just something that happens. But I'm going to wait till I get a flush of growth. Then I might go in and take some of the branches back. Actually, this one I would probably prune off. Oh, it's attached. Looks like it broke and healed over. So branches don't go like that. They go up and then out. This is going down. So that's not common for this particular plant. Although it doesn't have a real lateral growth. They're more this way. So this is not the one that weeps. So there's one that weeps more than the others. I didn't study them. I just know it's a haw, and I like the bloom on a haw. So it's clusters of white flowers, and again, it's food for the wildlife. So, yes, Kay.
And I asked about non-natives, crepe myrtles.
Yeah. Okay, crepe myrtles are a victim of a technique called pollarding. You cut back to the same point every year. The history behind that is in England, they had the plane tree, which is similar to our sycamore tree. Big, big trees, shaded the sides of the roads beautifully. But it also went out into the roads, and they have double-decker buses. So they had to prune them back. And so they would prune back just the side that was along the house, the highway. And they noticed that every time they pruned it back every year, it got thicker and thicker and thicker until it formed a big knot on the top of that branch. So the guy, Bernhard, I think is his last name, he developed a technique. It's to be used on certain trees. Somehow, we Americans thought it would look good on crepe myrtles. So it's called, the master gardeners fondly call it crepe murder. Because you're actually destroying the overall growth of your crepe myrtles. And some of them stay short. The Natchez, which is the white one, gets huge, like 30 feet tall, with a giant spread.
Beautiful one.
Yeah.
Like that.
So if you make the pruning cut properly, you cut back to the top of that knot where the new growth came out the year before. Landscapers don't know how to cut them, especially if they're a mowing crew. They come in and they cut your crepe myrtles. They'll cut it with a knot this big above the big knot. They'll leave a stub. That's going to rot. And it can bring in disease into that knot, and you're going to lose that whole branch. But once you start pollarding, it sort of has a shape of all these fist branches. By taking it back each year, it forms callousing, which makes the knot bigger and bigger and bigger. So eventually you have a big knot like this. There's also landscapers that go out there and they take the chainsaw and they go under the knot, under the big part that you're pollarding back to. And then eventually you have a 3-foot tree. So it's not a good technique to do on your tree. However, if you've already started to pollard it, you need to continue, because those shoots are epicormic, which means they do not connect to the heartwood. It's in the spring, when the spring comes and the days get long and they get hot and they get some water, they put out new growth. It's very vigorous and very upright. You won't notice they won't grow this way, they go upright. But they're only attached at the surface. So if you pollard for a few years and you get a big knot, and then you decide not to, then that growth is going to get heavier as it gets bigger year after year after year. And eventually, because of the weight of the branch, it's going to snap right off where it was pollarded to the first time, because it's only attached to the surface. So there's many, many drawbacks to that technique, and it's never supposed to be done on a crepe myrtle. Did that answer your question, Kay?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Now, we have some shrubs that you can take head shears to. The Leaf Viburnums, the Simpson stoppers. I don't like to, because I don't like my yard to be
Manicured.
yeah, manicured, thank you. I like mine to look natural. So if I see that especially Simpson stopper tends to lean towards the sun, I'll go in and I'll prune branches back. But I don't go in and, oh, I want to take this one back, so I'm going to cut it right here. Never cut a branch in half. Unless it's like a herbaceous one, which is your smallest shrub-like ones. If I'm going to remove a branch, you take it back to an existing trunk. And you make the cut outside bark branch ridge and the branch collar. Can't really see it that well on here. If you come up here, you can see it here. There's a raised, rough area in between where the branch comes into another trunk. That's called the bark branch ridge. And then as it comes up, there'll be a little swelling, not very far out, but there's a little like collar underneath. And that's your branch collar. You make the cut right outside the ridge and the collar. If you make it too far out, you've got a nub, you got a chance of disease, and it's going to have to rot, so you're going to have a hole in your tree eventually. If you make it too close, you wound both where you were cutting that has to heal and the existing trunk.
Can't heal.
So it can heal, but it takes longer, leaving it more time to get a disease or insects. Using pruning seal, there's been a lot of studies on that. It sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't. If you have a tree that's opened up from, you prune it inside of the foliage out so you got air going through, you've eliminated 50% of your problem. If you pick up your stuff, you trim off the ground so you don't get disease in there, that's another 30%. So this plant's doing great. It's got only a 20% chance of having a problem. So prune properly, sanitation, you can eliminate so many problems if we just clean up after ourselves. So garbage can, bag, or cart, take it out with you to the garden. Okay, how are we doing on time? Are we done?
Yeah, you're over.
All right, thanks.
So we'll take about a 10-minute break. You can use the bathrooms, you've got a few sign-up sheets for field trips and things like that, and then we'll get to our speaker. Thank you.
So now it's Chinese fake.
I don't like this. I'm not a big fan of like
$200 on a tree and $100 for them to plant a 15-gallon tree. They don't want to have a bad weather. So there is a whole lot of land in St. Petersburg, Tampa, where we really buy the water. There's a good growth.
As a matter of fact, I go there. It's not a proud tradition, but it's very terrific. Yes, thousands. Yeah. Road work, use rocks, and
So it happens before they do. You're right. You know, but they're not. Nobody's never looked at it.
And they're okay with
Well, the main dispersal agent is trucks carrying the car. It's not that. But
Hello. Good evening. Hey, Chris. All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you. And we have a very few quick announcements before we get our guest speaker up here. Just as reminders, the events that we have coming up, March 8th is the iNaturalist Survey in the Forest. March 25th is Ben's field trip with Hernando chapter, and that's also in the Withlacoochee State Forest. So sign-up sheets are back there. Donna is doing a presentation for the Inverness Garden Club on March 10th. That's at 1:45 p.m. And I am doing a presentation for the bee group in Homosassa on March 26th at 10:30 a.m. at the Old Homosassa Education Center. So if anybody wants to come to those, you can get more information from us either personally or by email. I'm also going to be volunteering March 12th at the Withlacoochee Gulf Preserve doing the BioBlitz. If anybody wants to come up and join us for that, please do. It's another great way to learn iNaturalist and get out and, you know, see things. And the property is really wonderful. It's a little bit of a drive for us, but it's really a nice place to go experience. And if you want to do that I'm just volunteering for it, for the chapter. That's being held by Conservation Florida. You can Google Conservation Florida BioBlitz and register through their Eventbrite page. And let me see. Oh, and then also at the end of the month, the Citrus County Fair is got their entries for the native plant division. So if you have any potted native plants that you want to put in there, I highly encourage you to do it so that they maintain this as part of the horticultural competition. They're not judged against other plants, they're judged against themselves. So it's like, if you've got a nice plant, all it has to do is look like a nice plant and you might actually get a blue ribbon. And the pots don't get judged. It can be an ugly pot. It's just a nice plant. The categories are shrubs, herbaceous, grasses, pollinator pot, ferns, palms, and other. So you can always do other, as long as it's a native plant. And then, oh yeah, you have to have owned it since December 26th, and you can't do anything fancy to it. You can't, like, you know, put a little bow on it or gloss its leaves or anything like that. It's just got to be a nice native plant. And then just a quick update for April. Our speaker will be Colleen Werner doing the rare plants of Withlacoochee State Forest. It's a big state forest month for us. And then on April 7th, which is right at the beginning of the month, so put it on your calendar now, we have a really nice field trip out at Half Moon. The 12th is, again, the iNaturalist survey. And then we have volunteer days in April. The 15th is the plant sale, which we need volunteers for. The 16th, we'll have a small booth at Anson's for their Earth Week event. And then on the 23rd, Barbara will be having an Earth Day event with Master Gardeners out at the Native Plant Garden, and she'd like a couple of people to help her out there. So the big... Five people. And see Barbara about that. Our big announcement, our business for the month, is the plant sale. So Sue, would you like to talk about that?
Thank you. All right, so we have a lot of plants. I didn't even do a count on it, but we've got more plants than we have in previous years. So it's pretty much 5 full pages of plants that are available to you. They are grown by either Green Isle Gardens or Steve Farnsworth Farms here. Really great selection of plants. Remember, these plants are sometimes in limited supply. We've already received our first order because she knows what she wants and she wants to get those plants. I number the envelopes as I receive them. So if you get your order in early and you get the last whatevers they are, you get them. The folks whose envelope came in the next day, they lose out. So it's first come, first served. You want to get it in. If you have some plants that you know you want, go ahead and get your order in now. You can always add to it. I have no problem adding to your order later on. Okay, I can do that. But if you've got stuff you want, make sure to get that order in. So we've got some order forms in the back there. We also have 2 different sizes of flyers. I would like for you to take some of these flyers. If you're in a community where you can post some flyers, please put them up. If you happen to go to a store that you think would go ahead and post the flyer, please ask them. We need your help to cover the county with these flyers and let people know that we've got this sale going on. This is our #1 big moneymaker for us. This helps us keep everything else going. All right, so I'd appreciate your help in getting the word out. And if you can think of another place that we need to get the word out to, like, we're going to put it in the Chronicle. I'm going to try to get a hold of the Neighbors magazines. They put out publications in a lot of different neighborhoods, Craigslist, etc. I'm going to put it out in all different kinds of places like that. But if you know of another place that we can put some more information out for free, please, just let me know. Thank you.
Okay, so that takes care of our business. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, I even wrote that down. There's a big pile of empty pots outside the door. If anybody needs pots, especially if you want to start doing some divisions and maybe bring in some plants for our plant table, then go ahead and grab some pots. They're available to whoever wants them, how many you want them. Yes, Barbara.
I scheduled 2 cleanup days at the demo garden.
Barbara says she has 2 cleanup days scheduled for the demo garden, and she's looking for volunteers.
March 12th,
March 12th,
9 to 11:30.
9 to 11:30.
If you get extra help, we get out early. And then the 9th of April,
9th of April,
9 to 11:30.
9 to 11:30.
The county building, it's a little demo garden. If you haven't been there, we have a sort of a protocol. If you show up and work, there's a lot of seedlings that come up in a pathway because they don't know that they're not supposed to. And you can adopt them. As many as you want to take. You can bring your plant soil, pot them right there, you can take them home and do it. But I don't like to throw out babies, so I let people take them home.
What's the April date again?
9.
Thank you.
We go Saturdays.
Starts at 9 a.m.?
Yeah, 9. I don't think it's gonna be too hot then, and if it's too hot, we might remove it up or just show up whenever. If you get there early, tell them what a weed is, and y'all know we need to be thrown. I'll probably be there at 8:30.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, Steve.
Okay, Gail Taylor and I are going to try to lead out and clean up the butterfly garden, church house hammock on March 9 a.m.
Okay, hold on a second. March 9th, 9 a.m. Gail Taylor and Steve Farnsworth are going to go to the Crystal River Church House Hammock Butterfly Garden. Yeah, so
Wednesday?
Was that
Wednesday?
Wednesday, March 9th, 9 a.m.
Wednesday, March 9th. Okay. Any other business? Okay. Kay, who are our new members that are here today? She's gonna, well, if you know you're a new member, you can raise your hand too. Okay. Hey, welcome. Was there anything that you wanted to know particularly, like questions that you had that are burning? Okay, well, we can't take care of a lot right now. So everybody who's a new member has received a blue ticket, I believe. Welcome to you too. So that entitles you to first pick off of the plant table. You don't have to go right now, but probably at the end of the meeting before we do our drawing, you'll want to get up there before anybody goes and gets a plant in front of you. But very, very much welcome to the chapter. All right, so I will get on to our speaker now. Jack Putz is a distinguished professor of biology and forestry at the University of Florida, where he has been a faculty member since 1982. He studied at the University of Wisconsin and has a PhD from Cornell University and was a NATO Post-Doctoral Fellow at the Tropical Forestry Institute at Oxford and a Bulliard Fellow at Harvard. He has a special interest in ethnobotany, forest products, and I'm familiar with his interest in the sea level rise on the Nature Coast and the Withlacoochee Gulf Preserve. So I would like to introduce Jack Putz.
Thank you, Athena. It's my pleasure to be here. The new part of the world for me. I'd come to the Withlacoochee Gulf Preserve all the time, but I've never come out this way. So lots to explore. And I thought tonight what I would talk about is stuff that I don't know very much about and issues with which I'm struggling. So if you're looking for wisdom, come to the wrong place. But I think I do have some stories that you might find intriguing. So I'm going to start right off with one of your favorite plants. Let's see. No, not working. You can go to the next slide. There it is. So maybe we can dim the lights. I know this is one of your favorite plants. Certainly one of mine. We have about 9 species of Smilax or catbrier here. One that you really favor in your gardens, I'm sure, if you're somewhat masochistic. I know I have in the light, you can see scrapes on my arms from trying to weed them out from my restoration site. But I've gotten intrigued with this group of plants as a botanist because they're so diverse underground, above ground as well. And I also have been intrigued because one of the species, Smilax Smallii, is, I believe, the red coontie of the Timucuans. flowers that are spectacular. And it can form a dense ground cover. It doesn't climb, so it stays low. It has everything you could want for a ground cover, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to cultivate it. I don't know if I can propagate it from seed. I'm playing around with it. Most of these you can split and plant, but this one doesn't develop a big rhizome network like the Smilax Smallii, but it does have runners, so it's probably possible to propagate it. And I'd like to come back here for your plant sale next year and see Smilax pumila, propagated and for sale and being promoted. And it would be a unique addition to our yards and a native species of boot. Yeah, it's just the real variable in color and that it creeps along and can cover the ground. It takes shade. It likes moist sites. I know that, at least where I find it, but no, it's a very low thing, ankle high.
Can you mow it?
I have no idea. I don't think you'd need to because it doesn't get tall.
Okay.
So
Where's it native to?
it's native all around here. It's a Florida native. Yeah, so we see it around, but here's a plant that what I'm introducing is this, and never come to a ecologist for business advice, but this is a business opportunity. No, probably not. None of these are, but this will be a great addition to our cultivated flora.
The problem with that is it grows really slow.
Ah, okay, that I didn't know. I have some good patches of it, but
Yeah, but it's been there for quite a while. It grows really slow.
I wonder if we can goose it along, but. So, I don't think a Smilax has ever been fertilized in the history of Smilax. So I don't know how it will respond. So there's another species with which I'm fascinated and have a suggestion, another opportunity. My students know that when I suggest there's an opportunity, they quickly disappear. But this one I think is a good one, and again, it could be lucrative, really lucrative. And this is Serenoa repens, our familiar saw palmetto. We know it mostly crawling along the ground for reasons that no one has been able to explain. On occasion, it grows upright, but saw palmetto is the most remarkable species. And an article came out just recently and I brought a copy of it here. It's online. It's in it's called the Herbalgram, and it's a magazine that's online and free, seems to be, on medicinal plants and interesting natural history stories. And this guy, Stephen Foster, wrote this amazing story about our saw palmettos. And I've been working on saw palmettos for a couple decades now, but I learned a lot from this article. One thing I did know before, that saw palmettos are probably the oldest thing in the forest. That research at Archibald Biological Station dates them at being well over 1,000 years. They grow slowly. They produce a couple leaves a year, except after a fire, they'll produce more. And the stems can get, 15 feet long. They also branch some, and that hasn't been very well explored. So the saw palmetto doesn't usually get very tall. Even if they do grow upright, they don't get much more than head tall. And it has a lot of potential, horticultural potential. But again, it's one of these slow growing natives that you can raise up a saw palmetto, and in the nurseries they do. You can buy them with either the green form or the white leaf form, which has more wax. It's a coastal variety, same species, but just genetic variation in the thickness of epicuticular wax, just, I guess, protection against salt. But in any case, you can grow them up, but it takes a couple years before a saw palmetto is marketable. So it's not something that's really common in the trade. Whereas these things are 500 years old. And you know, it's a fantastic plant for horticulture because it's much loved by bees and the fruits are eaten by animals. It doesn't get so tall that you have to prune it or get it taken down when it's going to destroy your house or land on your car. And it's a native species. But it's also famous for the fruits, which are harvested in amounts that stagger the imagination from here in Florida. The range of saw palmetto goes into Georgia, a little bit of South Carolina, a little bit over into Alabama, but that's it. And in this article, I read up-to-date data on the harvest and export of palmetto berries. They call them palmetto berries. It's actually a drupe, like a date. I don't know, has anyone eaten them? There we go. They can verify well, I don't know you folks. I probably shouldn't bring up marital issues, but I had some palmetto fruits that I had on the, yeah, they were on the kitchen counter, but I didn't mean for my wife to eat one. And we're still married. It's been a couple years, a couple decades actually, but she reminds me of that. And her description, I won't translate from the Spanish, but it was probably matched that of Jonathan Dickinson, who in the 1600s was shipwrecked off of Jupiter Island and had to walk up to St. Augustine. He walked with a bunch of locals, and along the way, what they ate was palmetto berries. And his description, I think, captures my experience with eating them. It's like eating rotten cheese steeped in tobacco juice. Just William Bartram, on the other hand, said that they were delicious. I don't know, you can't believe everything Bartram wrote. He was trying to sell books, right? So, but palmetto berries, I'll call them palmetto berries, no, not a berry, but palmetto berries are harvested in great quantities. We export to Europe 6,000 to 7,000 tons, 6,000 to 7,000 tons of dried fruit per year. And we export them for $2 a pound or so to a number of companies in Europe. And we import them in capsules, in bottles, for something like $200 a pound. And it's a typical exploitative first world, third world relationship. We can't figure out, I guess, how to get the fruits in the capsules. So we leave it to the Germans and the Italians to do that, and we buy them back. But these fruits are being harvested out there in the winter, late summer, when they ripen, by large numbers of people, and there's very little tracking of this industry. And yet they're harvesting thousands of tons of palmetto berries. This, I mean, just.
I've never seen them. Maybe the animals eat them all at my house.
Well, and the fruit crop varies from year to year tremendously. Only 1 year in 3, there's a good fruit crop. And that's why the industry in Europe is funding one of our graduate students to develop ways of maintaining fruit production, because the demand is increasing. So the demand is increasing, has been evident since the 1800s, when palmetto extracts of saw palmetto were sold all over the world, in Europe and North America, mostly used related to genitourinary issues. Now, I just didn't know until reading this article of how many other claims there are about the health benefits of palmetto, of palmetto extracts and palmetto berries. But this 1908 advertisement just had me rolling. So this is what some of you might want to think about this. I'll read it in case you can't see it. In this 1908 advertisement, it says, "Be plump and well developed, a marvel in quickly and permanently rounding out the feminine form, filling out the face to a perfect oval, and rounding out the arms and legs to graceful proportions." There you go. I mean, no wonder we're selling thousands of tons of palmetto berries to Europe every year. So there they go, and how they get the palmetto berries into those capsules is, we can't figure that out, but you can buy them. This is just from, Google. You type in palmetto berries, and this is the first page. I got tired of taking pictures of this. This is the second page. And the claims are amazing. In some of the other advertisements that are described in this article, there's accounts of curing impotence, good for hair loss, whatever. I mean, just whatever ails you. And as a spring tonic in general for health-giving benefits. Now, a lot of people believe this, but the Western scientists who my herbal friends would claim are supported by the AMA and the big farm claim that there's no difference between palmetto fruits and a placebo effect. I'm all into placebos. I have all kinds of placebos in which I depend. But this is a little bit worrisome that there's a whole literature of peer-reviewed articles in herbal magazines saying that this stuff is really effective, and then the scientists, the other scientists, are saying no, there's no evidence of effect. But there is a problem of availability of fruit, and I think we have a possible way of solving this problem. Vânia Pereira, she's a Brazilian student who's doing her PhD on this, on how to propagate saw palmettos. She's doing tissue culture and germinating seeds, but that's going to take 8 or 10 years before any of those plants produce fruits. So my argument and my suggestion, and I'm hoping I get takers in the audience, is that saw palmetto is treated as a weed in pine forestry, pine fiber farms. I'm a forester. I object calling pine plantations forestry because I do forestry. They're growing maize or corn, just doing it on a 20-year rotation. But when you're preparing a site for planting pines in lines, the first thing you do is reduce competition. Saw palmetto is a competitor. So you go in with a dozer and you rake them up, plow them up, you pile them, and then if you can burn them, you burn them, but often they don't, they just pile them, and then you bed and you plant the seedlings and you fertilize them and you grow toilet paper and disposable diapers. Not forests, plantations, don't confuse the two. But what I'm arguing is that in these piles of plants that have been wrenched out of the ground, every year there are hundreds of thousands of 500-year-old saw palmettos that could be transplanted. So what I'm suggesting to Vânia, and I don't know if she's going to take my advice on this, is to go into those piles and take out the stems, some of them are several meters long, and plant them. Now, I've done that before, and I know it's a very slow process. Not slow compared to growing them from seed, but slow insofar as you have to keep them moist for a year. And then they'll finally put roots down. They probably will take 2 or 3 years before they start to flower and fruit. But then in your yard, you have a 500-year-old palm that's doing the saw palmetto thing and maybe making fruit, so you just don't have to go out into the bush to get saw palmetto fruits. You can pick them in your backyard, unless you have bears in your backyard, in which case you'd have to fight the bears off, because bears like palmetto fruits. And that's a great plant, and I think the horticultural potential of this species is underexplored and deserves more attention. Now, you can buy them. They're expensive potted plants grown from seed, but these plants that are already taken from the ground, put in the ground and watered, would be a great addition to any landscape. Now, palms are odd insofar as the root pruning. When a palm root is damaged, it dies back to the trunk. So don't worry if when you go out to one of these piles and pull out a palmetto stem, it doesn't have any roots, put it in the ground anyway and just keep it moist. Watering once a week if it doesn't rain, that's all it would take. I've done it successfully at my farm because I have some leaky risers, and those that where I planted saw palmettos near the leaky risers, I have beautiful saw palmettos now that flower and fruit prolifically. But just the idea of 500, 800-year-old plants that you can transplant, I think is spectacular. And that's going to cut the time needed to get fruit production on track. Now, the arguments about saw palmetto are amazing because a lot of landowners, big landowners, are cashing in on this and charging people for collecting the fruits. The fruit collectors are, the people who pick strawberries at some times a year and go up to Michigan to pick peaches at other times a year, and they're eking out a living in a very dangerous occupation, actually. Walking through a clump of saw palmettos in the summer is not pleasant, and it is somewhat dangerous. And there have been palmetto berry harvesters who have died from rattlesnake bites because they're often in room. Yeah, it is, and that's why a lot of times people burn off if they're trying to go across landscape just to be able to see things. Okay, so I'm hoping I have takers, and I'm going to hear about people going out to piles of debris and logging prep sites and pulling out 500-year-old stems of saw palmetto. Because the last story I have to tell is not a real happy one, but it's another one with which I need assistance, and it's about lethal bronzing disease of cabbage palms. And I suspect you've all heard about this disease, and I know some of you have seen the effects of it with dead cabbage palms around. Now, cabbage palms it's our state tree. It's also the state tree of South Carolina. We did studies on cabbage palm in around Withlacoochee Gulf Preserve, actually in Waukesasa Bay Preserve. And for a cabbage palm in the wild to develop a trunk above ground takes on average 40 years. So they sit down there developing a trunk, developing a bigger bud for 30 to 40 years. And only when the bud is big enough do they start growing upright, because palms don't grow in diameter. They have to grow from that terminal bud. If the terminal bud isn't big enough, the stem's going to be too narrow and will fall over. So you have a 40-year-old plant that develops a trunk, and then it makes 5, 6, depending on conditions in cultivation, they can make 10 leaves a year, but in the wild, it's 3 or 4 or 5. And each leaf is separated by, just a fraction of an inch. And these palms can be, 30, 40 feet tall. Those palms, when you look at them going down the highway being transplanted, those palms are hundreds of years old. Transplanting palms works very well if they're big. The bigger the palm, the easier it is to transplant. And we found that that's because of water storage in the stem. So the water comes in and out of storage. And so in most plants, the smaller the plant, the easier it is to transplant. Not so with palms. Similarly with cabbage palms. Now, cabbage palms from seed in a nursery can start getting a trunk above ground in 10 years. But again, most cabbage palms that are available on the market are not grown in nurseries. They're transplanted from the wild. And I'm sure you've seen that out on the highway. And I'm sure you've seen this too, the sad sight of a 250-year-old palm dead on the roadside. And we've known about this disease since for 20 years. At least in 2008, the mapped range of lethal bronzing disease was restricted to the area in Hillsborough County and the environs. And then by 2020, it's now in every county in Florida, and it's skipped over into Georgia and over into Alabama. So I started agitating about this back in 2008. I had a blitz of letters to the editor, newspapers all over the country, writing legislatures and so forth. But my primary work is not in Florida. I'm a tropical forest ecologist. I work on trying to reduce the deleterious environmental impacts of logging in the tropics. So I go away for long periods of time, and so there are gaps in my efforts to have something done about this problem. Well, what's been done is that a lot of research. And Brian Bader, who's a great scientist, works for IFAS at Fort Lauderdale, and he cited in this policy brief that I handed out, and that was circulated to you, I think. He's done a lot of the basic research on this. So we know that the disease is transmitted. We know that the disease is caused by a phytoplasma, which is a wall-less bacterium that can't be cultivated in Petri plates. But the larvae of this plant phloem-sucking, sap-sucking insect is what transmits the pathogen often from the roots of turf grass to the palm. Okay, so Brian Bader is a scientist, and a scientist does science. They don't do advocacy. And especially if you work for IFAS, you don't do advocacy that might hurt the source of your funding, which is the industry. He said to me that he would do something, perhaps say something about the connection between turf grass and this disease when he gets tenure, which is alarming. But you've probably heard what's going on at the University of Florida. It gets worse, and I won't go there. But this gets to my heart as a scientist, because I'm unsure a lot of the time how much time I should spend on science, making discoveries, which I love doing, and how much time I should spend on advocacy, at which I'm not very good. I'm not very effective. But we're trying anyway. So this lethal bronzing disease that's been described, if you see a palm that is, you suspect of having lethal bronzing disease, and the symptoms of a palm that's infected and infectious is premature fruit drop and yellow, and so the fruits fall off early, and then the outermost leaves start to turn yellow. And you see that there are instructions in this policy brief, and they're available from IFAS. You can take a sample of the stem and send it in, and they do a PCR test, like you're getting done for COVID, to determine whether the palm is infected and infectious. When the palms have gotten to this stage, they're no longer infectious. The leaf hopper is already gone, but you have an eyesore of a dead tree. Yes, question?
If it's a bug like that, how does it get from a tree over here, and 3 blocks away, there's another one with it? But
well,
there's other ones all around that
yeah.
green. So
this is a weak flying insect, so it's not likely to fly long distances. The predominant, I should also point out that this was originally known as the Texas phoenix palm decline, because phoenix palms, which are grown in nurseries, was the first species on which this disease was described. And then it was found that it would jump from date palms to cabbage palms. Now, this disease is very similar to the lethal yellowing disease that swept through South Florida in the 60s, killing palms like galore, but not cabbage palms, not the native palms, but it killed all the coconuts, for example, in South Florida. So the main dispersal agent of this disease is trucks carrying diseased nursery material, particularly date palms, at 55 miles an hour all over the state. So yeah, there are other modes of dispersal, but this is the one that bothers me because, there are nurseries here and there are people transplanting palms from the wild here from populations that are infected with lethal bronzing disease, and they're moving them all over the state. So it's no surprise that it's moved from Tampa to Jacksonville in a decade, not by birds, by trucks. So we have responsible authorities that are supposed to be protecting us from problems like this. And they're not. They haven't done anything. And there's a lot of science, and Brian is right, keep going with the science, but IFAS, which should be, raising alarm calls about this and putting pressure on the legislature and US Department of Agriculture and other groups to enforce some requirements for phytosanitary certification. It would be that a nursery, before it can ship palms, has to have its palms tested. And then it would have a certificate and it can move the palms around. People transplanting palms would have to have certified that there's no lethal bronzing disease in the area from which the palms are being distributed or being carried. But we haven't been able to move even close to that. So back in December, we came out with this policy brief. And the policy brief, I've never done a policy brief like this before, and I didn't do it on my own. I had a really talented undergraduate student named Shruti Jadala, and she is an anthropology major, and she came to me for an independent research project. And our original idea was for her to do a anthropological analysis of APHIS, the agency part of the USDA that's supposed to be protecting us from these kind of pathogens. And I thought, well, what kind of people work there and why aren't they doing anything? And it's not like this is the first time this has happened. I mean, I'm not old enough to remember chestnut blight, but I do remember Dutch elm disease came through and wiped out all the elms up and down our street. I saw the effects of the hemlock woolly adelgid that came through and killed all the hemlocks in eastern North America. Oof. And then more recently, starting in 2002, the red bay wilt that came in and killed red bays and sassafras. We knew about it in 2002. It was restricted to Savannah Harbor. And I wrote letters to the Avocado Growers Association in South Florida because that's the same genus as red bay that was being killed by this disease around Savannah. They didn't respond. Another crazed environmentalist crying wolf. And it wasn't crying wolf. Now, taxpayers are subsidizing the avocado growers in South Florida to inject their trees to protect them from the red bay wilt. I'm worried about it being transmitted to Mexico, where in the mountains of Central America, the family, the Lauraceae, is dominant at mid and high elevation. So it's be a terrible thing. So in this policy brief, and we tried to summarize what was known about this disease and what's at stake. And the numbers that we came up with were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars in takedowns of palms that die on public right-of-ways. Just that. We went to urban tree inventories and we said, well, what proportion of your urban forest is cabbage palm? And then we took a $200 average takedown fee, which turns out to be very low, to cut down and remove a cabbage palm, and the numbers just escalated. So it's huge. And we thought that if people were aware of that, fiscal concerns might promote responsible agencies to act responsibly. Well, hasn't yet. We thought that if people realized just how pivotal this species is for our wildlife, birds, mammals, 300 species of insects visit the flowers, big honey producers, and we thought that might attract attention. And we suggested possible interventions. The phytosanitary certification, I think, is the principal one that we can do now. And we've been suggesting this for over a decade, and it hasn't happened yet. So I guess what I'm hoping for is some suggestions from you all who have had backgrounds that are probably vastly different from mine about how to at least increase public awareness of this problem. When we had the policy brief figured out pretty much, and then we decided that, well, how are we going to distribute this thing? Because it's always a problem getting things around. And we went first to Native Plant Society, and Jean Kelly and Valerie Anderson, who you probably know both of them, were really helpful in redesigning this, and the Native Plant Society was the first organization that endorsed this, which allowed us to put their logo on it. And then FNPS sent it around, posted it, has it on their blogs and so forth. So there are 5,000 members or so. So it's a big organization. Then we went to the Sierra Club, and they were hesitant, but they finally came on board. And so they've sent it out to, some chapters have sent it out. The Florida Wildflower Federation or Foundation was very reluctant because they do get funding from the nursery industry. And this is an advocacy piece. This is saying, hey, nursery industry, you're being irresponsible. We need some way of protecting our state tree from this suffering the fate of hemlocks and elms and red bays. But they went along with it as well. And then some smaller organizations, well, Florida Defenders. But basically, we haven't done very well. If you ask the average Floridian, or probably 95% of Floridians, not even the average, why did that palm die? They'll have no idea. They also have no idea that the palm's probably 200 years old. They think they're very young. So our question is, and maybe I can turn the lights back on, because I'd really like to have a little discussion about this topic in particular, because I'm hoping for insights about, first of all, how to raise awareness, and then what kind of mechanisms can we use to get the responsible agencies to act responsibly? Because just think what's at stake. If all the cabbage palms died, and I'm not saying they're going to, but all the red bays died, oh, there's still babies around.
The dogwoods are dying too, Florida dogwood.
And there's other diseases, and we need to start being more proactive. But Americans don't like regulations. They don't like restrictions. But with so much at stake, I'm wondering if people aren't going to go along with this. So if you can't see one of these policy briefs, maybe you can pass them around a little bit. I didn't bring quite enough, but yes, suggestion.
Seems to me like, what's the model for the citrus greening? Why aren't they going after it like they are good with the citrus? Because it's not a trash crop.
That's money. Oranges are money.
They don't have the lobby that the Native Plant Society does, but
He said there's so much money involved in taxpayers' expensive.
That's
Removing the tree.
But that's after the fact. But if you compare that to the orange business, it's a drop in a bucket.
so the student Shruti Jadala just has a op-ed coming out on Sunday in the paper, Gainesville Sun anyway, and the last paragraph is I really found amusing. And it addresses this point. Unfortunately, the citrus lobby is strong, whereas the native plant lobby is not. Perhaps if the hundreds of animal species dependent on cabbage palms for food and shelter were to lobby with us, appropriate actions would be taken. Hungry bears would be effective lobbyists. So, I mean, it just, whatever we can do, but I think that making the fiscal issue central is probably not a bad, because people don't act on their moral concerns maybe as much as they do on their wallet concerns. So there's the takedown fees. Now cities like Jacksonville and Gainesville, they're not buying palms anymore. So there's some pressure on the industry, but it's not big pressure because palm prices haven't gone down. Yeah.
Is there any relation with the type of pruning when they do that drastic horrible pruning?
Yeah,
Do you find them more susceptible to the disease versus out into the?
Yeah, the question about this radical pruning that Jono Miller, who's a very active Native Plant Society member, and he just had a book come out called the Palmetto book, which is a really wonderful read. And he has a chapter on lethal bronzing disease, but we found no connection between that treatment, which is odious, but apparently not associated with this problem.
So does it run rampant in groups, or is it more?
It seems like somebody pointed out, one dies here and then another one dies over there, and we don't know that. And the connection with turf grass, I've seen several occasions where there's an established palm and then they bring in new turf grass and then the palm dies. And so I think that the larvae, the early instars are being transplanted with the turf grass. And turf is the #1 agricultural crop in Florida, as you know. So it's a big lobby. But they could have phytosanitary certification as well if that was called for.
Or is there a way to sterilize the sod?
Probably could. That sounds more expensive. And I think we need research on where on sod farms are they susceptible. It might only be if there are cabbage palms nearby, so on the edges, or they could not plant those areas. There are other things that could be done. But right now, it's not transplanting cabbage palms that's the principal problem. It's moving nursery stock of date palms that are grown from seed in pots and shipped all over the place. Yeah.
I think that with stable palms, there's not such a landscaping need for them. People don't really appreciate that as a landscaping palm. So when you tell them our stables are dying, it's not a big deal because there's so many other palms they can put. We're like, in my house, I have like 40 stable palms. Well, I'm not gonna spend $200 each to pull them down, or I'm not gonna spend $75 each to test them.
Yeah, and it is
Homeowner, it's too much.
It really is, but I don't know. In some places, cabbage palm, like in these tree inventories, cabbage palms was up there in at least #1 or 2 in terms of the number of street trees. So cabbage palms in some cities. Yep. Yeah, especially down here, you have more diversity of palms that you can plant than we do even in Gainesville.
Well, stables are cheap. They're cheap palms as far as for a homeowner to plant.
Yeah, because you can plant one for about $200, I think.
That's the only reason they're popular in this area, I think, but other than that, just a native palm.
So getting back to the turf grass.
Go ahead.
So I was at Green Nursery, and they're suggesting frog food, and I apologize, I don't know the scientific name, for replacing turf, which I bought some and I'm getting ready.
Alternative, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there are quite a few, but it depends if you want that golf course look. You're never going to get that.
It's hard because the homeowners associations want that
Yeah.
green grass.
The homeowners associations are a big problem, but some of the newer developments are saying, or they're banning zosia grass, for example, because it's so demanding of water. They won't allow installation of irrigation in backyards for lawn sprinklers, and these are good steps in the right direction. But how did in most of us live through this transition to accepting these lawns, these modern lawns, and how did that happen in our lifetimes? It's just remarkable. And how do we change that? I think that's what we need to do. And diversity, I would think that diversity would do it, but that's my religion. I worship diversity, and other people don't like it. Because if you change, and there's been research on this, if you change your mowing schedule from weekly to fortnightly, the number of flowers that appear increases spectacularly. And that's all it would take. And it doesn't look scrappy. It's just got flowers. But when you're selling chemicals to kill clover and dollarweed, it's like people don't accept that. And I'd rather have AstroTurf, frankly, because you don't have to fertilize an herbicide and pesticide AstroTurf. More.
Change that, though. You have to wait till the dinosaurs die out. That's the American thing, is your lawn. How many people spend so much time and so much money, and they don't care?
But the dinosaurs are us, and we learned this. It wasn't like we were brought up with it. You know, we had push lawnmowers and no herbicides, broadleaf herbicides. Those came later.
We're not all dinosaurs. I don't pull any flowers out.
No, not that, but we grew up during our lifetimes. This cultural change happened.
I was reading that some of the prominence of lawns came from English, where they had the manor houses, where they, you know, it was a status symbol because they were able to have the money to employ all these people to keep a beautiful, huge, green, perfectly manicured lawn. And so that became a status symbol. And so then the common folk started wanting to have their own smaller version of the same style manor house with a expansive green lawn.
I agree with you, except that a lot of those manor houses had meadows that were cropped by sheep. And they were expansive and green, but if you look carefully, then, you know, the diversity started to emerge. We did on the lawns on UF campus last year, I couldn't take students to the field. I couldn't put them in a van. So I was doing labs on campus, and we had an area the size of this room, campus lawns, and we found 46 species in that. No, most of them were exotic or cosmopolitan weeds, but it was 46 species of flowering plants, you know, which is pretty spectacular.
Right, but the common folk weren't able to actually go to those manor houses and see from up close that it actually wasn't a monoculture. So what they ended up trying to do was
painted
cheaply create the same look from afar, which became the monoculture lawn, which was chemically manufactured.
Which became possible with the advent of these chemicals.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So it was not truly understanding what they originally were, but trying to look like it.
So changing, what I realized is that I need to interact more with behavioral scientists who understand not only, because I've interpreted my job as a scientist as providing information. You know, I do science, I provide the information. I've realized a long time ago that I needed to provide the information in the appropriate form to the appropriate people. So there's a direct linkage in my science to the people I want to influence. But I don't know very much about what causes people to change their behavior. I can change their knowledge, but information does not change behaviors. It's necessary. So my job is still necessary, but it's not sufficient. So then you need those other people who have other talents and other training to take the information and somehow make it into, make it so that it results in the behavioral change. For example, there was a great program in Mexico. It was a randomized controlled trial. So the government did this, research organization working with the government. They wanted to increase retention of girls in middle school. So they had all these villages and they matched them, and then they randomly selected half of them, and they provided the families of girls money. It was like $150 at the end of the year, every year that the girls stayed in school. And this small amount of money was sufficient to substantially increase school retention. Well, that was about 15 years ago. There was a follow-up study. So the girls that stayed in school, there were fewer teen pregnancies, which is a big problem, and higher employment. They married later. And so all of this had great societal benefits, but it was done in a manner that showed the effectiveness of this intervention. In my mode of trying to change behaviors is to publish papers in scientific journals that nobody reads, but I get promoted. So.
You got that one right.
Yeah, don't rub it in, please.
Oh,
This is the advertising.
Oh, well.
I'm willing to have a question.
the experience that I've had is a lot of the impact on lawns has come from people who have moved from the northeast or Midwest. Everybody had lawns. It was easy to have a lawn. You don't have to bring in turf on the whole have a lawn, and everybody had lawns. So they came to Florida, and they thought, I have to have a lawn, because I've always had a lawn. And the grass is impossible. I mean,
Well,
you know,
the chemicals you have to use, yeah.
it's just terrible. I mean, St. Augustine, I could burn it all up. I can't stand it. And so what my approach is, let's have as much ground cover as we can have and as little grass as possible. Well, then you deal with homeowners associations, who, I don't know, did they come from the Northeast? I don't know. They came
Probably.
from somewhere where everybody had to have green grass. And I know I've talked to Floridians who say, you know, like in some of our communities, you're not required to have a green lawn all the time. And they use bahia or whatever it is that's natural, and it's brown sometimes and it's green sometimes. And I think a lot of it has to come from those of us. I find that when people come to a new environment, they seldom stop and say, what's different here?
Yes.
You know, what can I learn that doesn't work here that worked up there? And one of the things I did when I came down here was take the Florida Medicine Naturalist courses. And, you know, that's a revelation. It's a wonderful thing. And I try to spread it as much as possible. I volunteer down at Three Sisters, and I'm always talking to people about various aspects of things. So I think part of that issue is a cultural, as you're saying. They come down with an expectation of a green lawn. And I say to people, do you have kids playing soccer in your backyard anymore? You don't need a green backyard.
Mm.
You know, you don't need smooth grass. You know, if your grandkids come down here and put them in the water, forget about the backyard. And so I think that, you know, I'm not exactly sure how to do it. I mean, I try to do it in my own way, in my own. We've gone to, well, I'm not living in that community anymore, but that has gone to providing a variety of grasses that you can use rather than just one, which is a step in the right direction. But I think a lot of it has to do with saying to people, you don't live in New York anymore. Okay, this is a whole different environment.
So people coming here from places where maybe it's easier to grow grasses, you don't have to use so many chemicals, where you don't have an aquifer that's getting polluted by lawn fertilizers. That's part of the problem, I'm sure. I mean, the traditional yard care in Florida was a swept yard. If you had grasses, I mean, I have friends that, you know, have grown up here. I didn't. I came here from the north as well. And they said, well, every Saturday I had to go to my grandmother's, and if she came out and saw anything green in her yard, I'd have to go back out and pull it up. You know, get all the leaves out, get all the green stuff out. And it was good for fire. Everybody had a wooden house, and the place was burning, right? So that was a good way to protect your house from fire. Fire-safe gardening, nothing. Also was good for snakes, for chiggers, and ticks. I liked it, and I had a swept yard. I had a teenage girl. It was good for footprints, you know, see who's coming and going. No, she's a nice girl. She's grown up and a mother now. But so that was the aesthetic. And you see that in some African-American neighborhoods still, swept yards, but it's not very common. So changing this aesthetic is really important.
What are you seeing during the education? You see young people all the time. There's your hope. There's
Yeah.
your target. Are you seeing any change? I mean, they don't even recycle in the schools around here. I can't believe it.
No, it's hard. And the teachers in Tallahassee commute to Georgia because the salaries are higher. So, you know, with Governor DeSantis, you know, the salaries aren't getting any better, and school boards are now getting dismantled and over ridiculous issues. And so it's less and less attractive to be a teacher. And then the teachers, you know, are having to take second jobs and so forth. So they're not doing they're not as effective as they could be.
So maybe your cabbage palm awareness needs a Kardashian to make an Instagram post and say no bronzing on these cheeks.
Yeah. There we go. That's what we need. We need some advocacy like that. Yeah.
I got a simple question. How long do these cabbage palms live? 200 years, 300,
500 maybe. 400 or 500.
I have seen some like that big around and say 100 foot tall.
Yeah. Remember, they don't grow in diameter. They started out like that, but yeah, they vary a lot.
I got one in my yard right now.
Yeah.
That big.
Yeah, they do vary. Yep.
I just want to share a story that shows that some things are possible, and I'll try to be brief, but many of you may know about, I mean, everybody knows about the manatees dying on the East Coast. Well, in Crystal River, we had, as a result of a hurricane and the no-name storm, an influx of Lingvia algae, which killed the seagrass in Kings Bay. And we had a Rotary member from the Kings Bay Club who said, let's try to clean up Hunter Springs. Well, it's a small bay, it's manageable, see what we can do. Went in there literally with rakes, Boy Scouts, Young Marines, anybody who would volunteer, raked it up. And then the power plant, which has to raise either seagrass or fish to compensate for whatever it does, provided the seagrass. And we planted the seagrass. We had to make cages because, of course, the manatees were eating it before it was rooted. For every plant of seagrass that we plant, we are getting 4 plants. We plant 50 acres of seagrass. We now have 200. We got the kids at Crystal River Primary involved. Every class grows a tank of seagrass, and the 5th graders plant it in Hunter Springs.
All those kids in Citrus County are doing.
When that worked, the Save Crystal River, which is a nonprofit, was started down there. Save the Manatee and a number of organizations went to the legislature with 6,800 letters from the elementary kids in Citrus County. They were overwhelmed, and they gave us $1.5 million to hire a restoration company that's now vacuuming out the Lingvia algae and planting seagrass. This past January and February, we ran field trips for 54 5th grade classrooms. They came down, they went fishing in the part of the day, the other part of the day we taught them about water cycle, erosion, coastal restoration, and they planted tanks with seagrass, and they are going to be coming down in May to plant the seagrass.
Yeah.
Now, that was a very ground roots.
And that seems to be the only thing that works anywhere. It has to come from local, and especially with the legislature being the way it is, it's going to take a huge amount of pressure. I just want to close, and then I'm going to stay around and get some more ideas. I have branched out. I am doing something other than writing boring science. I'm writing what is probably the most popular ethnobotanical novella ever written. About Yaupon, which is now $1 million industry. This is the native ilex tea. This happens to be from Yaupon Brothers, which was the group with which I worked initially. They started this business on the basis of research that we did on the antioxidants and caffeine in Yaupon. So Yaupon was a big industry in the 1800s. It fell into disfavor because it became associated with Black people and poor people, and then the Ceylon tea industry came and took over, so tea became Ceylon tea, Camilla Sativa, and not Yaupon. But now there are 10 companies that are making and selling Yaupon. Now, I brought some, and I brought other things to sell. I don't make any profit on these things, but it's a great present for people, especially if you give them a copy of Yaupon Wins, which is a story about Yaupon. It's a kid's book. It's a teenager who discovers the benefits of Yaupon. And then I've had this out for a couple of years now. This is a 56 nature essays about Florida. There's one about Yaupon, there are live oaks, there are cabbage palms, saw palmetto, Spanish moss, whatever you can think of that's right outside the door. This I give to people who are new to the state or new to nature, the nature that they can see all around. And the compliment that I've most often gotten on this one is that people like the essays because they're short and then they can fall asleep. I'll take that as a compliment. But when I wrote my first full-length novel, jungle novel, because I work in the jungle and I read a lot of trashy jungle novels, I read so many trashy jungle novels that I said, hell, I can write one of them. And so I did. And so Borneo Damned, a very family affair, is a historical fiction that takes place in North Borneo, in Kuching, in the Malaysian state of Sarawak, where I spent 10 years, first as a Peace Corps volunteer and then as a researcher. But this is fiction. My father figures into this because he flew the hump during World War II, and he was why I got interested in the tropics. But he's fictionalized, and the grandfather and the great-grandfather in this book are complete fiction. So in this book that's full of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, really full, and nature, a lot. I'm a biology professor, right? So there's a lot of natural history in this. There's a lot of politics as well and Borneo Dam comes from the area where I was working in North Borneo has become flooded now. It was dammed, the Bakun Dam was put in and a huge area was flooded, and the Iban people who lived there were evicted from their homes and so forth, but this takes place before that. So if you admit to yourself that you really enjoyed Tarzan books and want to read a modern one, I brought some copies here. So they're all for sale. The Yaupon Wins is 5, and these are all 10, and you're welcome to them. 10, just to make things easy. But great presents. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Jack.
There's some sort of law or regulation in Tallahassee that the homeowners association cannot require you to have lawn, but you have to have that regulation, and I can get it to you because I know somebody who knows it, because she's used it against the Sugar Mill Homeowners Association, and the only thing she's got to do is maintain 10 foot from the road, either with grass or rock. The rest of the yard is all hers. But they do come down on her, especially during winter when things turn brown because of freezes. She has to premature cut them back because you can't have brown in your front yard. But there's a regulation. And also on turf grass, if you want a grass that takes less chemical, less fertilization, less mowing, try to find somebody that sells centipede. Fertilizer will actually kill it. It does goes semi-dormant in the wintertime, comes back in the spring. The only disadvantage is that it puts out long runners. So you might have to edge your bed lines a little more. But I have it, the birds brought it, and I mow maybe 3 times a year.
Is there any other business tonight? Okay, so again, we're gonna do our drawing very soon, but if the new members would like to go up to the table and get their plants now, that would be good. We'll give you a little head start. And if you'll come up and do the drawing, but for everybody that's at home, I'm gonna turn off the broadcast and then we'll get to our drawing. So have a good night for the people at home.